Welcome to the Woodwind Doubling Channel, episode 15. You guessed it, Pennywhistles today. Lots and lots of Pennywhistles. Now you might ask, why so many Pennywhistles? Well, they're a simple folk instrument and they're made to be played in specific diatonic keys. For example, the most frequently used one that you're going to run into is a penny whistle in D, standard whistle in D. If you go out and buy a penny whistle somewhere, whether it's metal, plastic, anything else, it's going to be most commonly in D. The reason is the most Celtic music is played frequently in keys like D and G. You can play fairly easily in D and in G on a D whistle. Now, a thing we have to be careful about here, if you're used to playing transposing instruments like clarinets and saxophones, you're used to the moniker for the transposition being what comes out when you play a C. For example, on a B-flat clarinet, you finger C, B-flat concert comes out. Penny whistles are a little bit different. They are named according to the pitch that comes out when all holes are closed. Now we have 6 holes on the instrument, only 6. There's no thumb hole in the back to facilitate octaves. And when all 6 fingers are covered on a D penny whistle, you get a D. The native scale of this instrument is actually a D major scale. So it's going to go D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Now that's very handy when you're playing Irish music, but what about when you want to play something that's in different keys? This is where we run into some problems. You can get penny whistles in other keys. For example, the whistle, the larger of the whistles, is the one I was playing the opening theme on. Now, it's in C. Problem is that it's still 6 holes covered to get C. So we've got a C major scale, but your standard woodwind player who's used to playing saxophone or oboe or flute, what we're fingering is a D major scale. It looks like D major, especially if you're an oboist. This is pretty much the same fingerings other than the long C sharp that you'd be used to playing. So that gets a little bit confusing when we notate things, because I've seen arrangers who will write things at the concert pitch and just leave it up to the player to figure out which whistle to play and how to accommodate the notes. And oftentimes they write in the wrong registers anyway, so whistles really sound up into the piccolo range most of the time. That means having an array of different whistles that can be played in different keys to accommodate, not everything's going to be in D in a Broadway musical. It might be things in E flat, maybe things in G, F, A flat, B flat, who knows. A show like Secret Garden, which I've mentioned before, has whistle parts in F, D, C, B flat, and low D. Low D whistle is a bit of a beast. There's a low D whistle. There it is in comparison even to my C whistle. I kind of wish I'd gotten the nicer version of this. They do make a version that's got a finger, essentially a key for the low D finger there. And they also make a version that's tunable. All of these Susato whistles that I'm using are tunable whistles. This is a 2-part body, so you can take the head off, you can tune the instrument, and in some cases you can actually get interchangeable head and body sets, or use one head and several different bodies. Is a bit of a cost saving. It doesn't work out that well if you're actually going to be switching instruments quite a lot. You want to have the head on and ready to go. The low D whistle is a bit of a reach. You've got to really stretch the fingers. Again, used more in traditional music. If you're going to play a low D whistle, you really want to get the one with the extra key on it. It makes life a lot easier, and it certainly makes it much more useful if you get a tunable whistle for using in any kind of a pit situation. As I mentioned, the whistles that I'm using are made by Susato. These are constructed from ABS. They're actually individually tuned. If you look closely at the tone holes, you'll see that they've actually chamfered the edges of the tone holes and fine-tuned them. So the intonation on these for whistles is quite good. It's a straight bore. They make a few different bore sizes too. That gives you a little bit more solidity of tone when you're playing down low. and gives you a good flexibility, good solid sound. They make some smaller bore instruments that tend to be a bit sweeter in sound. If you're using it in a pit and you're being mic'd, then you've got some flexibility. Just choose the one that sounds the best to you. There's not a huge dynamic range on whistles, kind of like recorders. They go from MP to MF, and a lot of the time they'll play their best when you're actually playing fairly full out. Sometimes playing into the upper register of some of the whistles really means you need to be playing loud pretty much all of the time. The ones I have here, whistle in B flat. I have the one you saw already in C. I have one in D, and I have one in E flat. Now the E flat whistle can actually come up more than you think. If you're playing with pipes, both Highland bagpipes are pitched at A460, so essentially they sound a half step above where they're written, but they tend to be written in a sort of an A mixolydian. In other words, you're going to run into like the one sharp in it, and because they sound higher in pitch, sometimes something like an E flat or a B flat whistle would be a better choice for playing with pipes. But also in shows, you're going to run into passages in E flat. I've even run into a concert band arrangement that had an optional whistle part, and it called for an E flat whistle. We talked about the fact that we're used to thinking of all fingers down as being D. Now, if you look around for some standards about whistle notation, there's a few different opinions. If you look at the charts that are provided by the manufacturer, Susato, if you look at the fingering charts, you'll see that the D whistle has the fingers that we expect to see, but as you look up and down, they'll show the actual pitches for the other fingerings on their various instruments. This is really complex. If you're doubling, you don't want to be worried about trying to memorize 12 different names for one fingering. It gets very confusing. So a better way that's been adopted by a lot of writers, and most of the doubling players that I know will advise arrangers to do this, is to think of all penny whistles being written as a diatonic D major scale. Doesn't matter which instrument, which pitch. What the writer does is then write the pitches they want in the key they want, and then put the whistle part so it appears in D major. So, for example, if I was going to write a part for a C whistle, when I have all fingers down, I would read a D. So that means that the arranger has to treat it as though it was a B-flat transposing instrument. Now, if you're using any sort of decent notation software, that's pretty easy to figure out. It gets a little bit of a mind bend when you get into some of the E-flat things, but that's the best way to do it and obtain a quick result. That way the player is always looking at something in D major. You could even write in G major key, because you can get a fairly decent, a couple of chromatic notes in there. A C natural, the equivalent of a C natural in most whistles, comes out all right. So that gives you a couple of key possibilities within one whistle. It's always good to consult with someone who plays the whistles, but plays them in a pit orchestra concept. If you're addressing someone who plays them as a folk instrument, it's not maybe going to be as helpful unless they're very good readers and have a good theoretical knowledge. Now, it can depend. If you're doing a show where all the parts are memorized, they're played on stage, and it's in a folk music concept, you're probably not going to have to worry about that. You just come up with the notes you want, dictate them, and away we go. If you want parts that are going to be written, then you're going to have to take that into account. I did a production a few years ago of a version of Pirates of Penzance out at the Stratford Festival, and we had penny whistle parts on a couple of the Woodwind books. And initially, some of the tunes were in particular keys, and it worked well on a D whistle, and things were written in D major, perfectly happy. They decided to move the vocal key up a semitone. So what we did was we just went out and got E-flat whistles, played off the same part. So the whistle parts looked the same regardless of what the transposition was. All it said was, use this particular whistle. That made life a whole lot easier. Now, there are some shows that I've played the books where it wasn't like that. Secret Gardens books, everything's written at actual pitches, and it's a bit of a pain to play. Especially the B-flat whistle parts are really difficult to kind of figure out. Sometimes because of the diatonic nature of things, you can get through a little bit easier, but still it's a bit of a pain at times. So always, if you can, if you're writing for whistles and you want to use that in a doubling concept as part of, say, a flute book or another woodwind book, writing everything in D major and then picking the whistle key that fits is often a great way to do it. It's kind of a little bit more like the way French horns were written at one time, where they would write everything in C major and then just declare a key, so they would put the appropriate crooks in. It's a bit of a flip around in your brain, but once you get used to it, it works quite well. So whistles, a lot of fun to play. If you're looking into playing some of these things, start listening to some of the traditional music that they're used in, so you get an idea of the character and how they're played and the kinds of ornamentation that are played. Ornamentation, very common in any of the Celtic music things, and that's usually what you're going to hear these used for. They want a Celtic sound from this instrument, so you need to be able to do that. You also need to be able to do some bends and things into notes, and those are basically done by sliding the fingers off. Could use some work on it. But like anything else, you spend some time and listen to the source material and get used to what things should sound like. Anyways, there's a bit of information about Pennywhistles for you. I hope that's been useful. If you have questions or comments, please leave them below. Please subscribe to the channel and feel free to share it as well. And we'll see you next time on the Woodwind Doubling channel. Bye for now.